观众朋友们好，欢迎大家来到今天的思想先驱报现场。最近呢，如果您有关注到新闻，可能会被美国国内以及美国外交方面的各种新闻是看花了眼，每一天都有变化今天呢是和乌克兰已经说好了矿产协定，随后呢又出了变数，白宫一场大闹，更是抢夺了国际媒体的视线。那不仅仅是乌克兰问题这个关税问题也是，今天说要收关税，明天又取消了，谁也不知道川普到底要做哪一出。近期我们也经常听说一个词，叫什么呢？叫反向尼克松。大致的意思就是之前呢，在这个尼克松时代，那么美国呢是联中制俄或者叫联中制苏，用这样的一种策略来解决最大的地缘政治对手对于美国的相对风险和威胁，拉一个打一个，各个击破。什么叫反向尼克松呢？就是现在看来这个川普和俄罗斯可能是会有大交易了。那到底为什么这么做呢？有人说，这呢其实就是把尼克松时代的三角关系颠转过来，美国要拉住俄罗斯，这样腾出手来对付中国。这个说法到底对不对实际上有很多不同的争议。那今天在思想先驱报里我们不讨论反向尼克松，我们来讨论反向毛泽东。这呢是海峡时报的一位高级专栏作家和南华早报的前主编王向伟先生在一次播客节目中所交谈的主要内容。那王向伟先生我们很知道这个知名的有关于中国的分析专家，现在呢是在香港的浸信会大学任教。他提出了一个非常有趣也非常新鲜的观点，在今天节目中我们特别跟网友朋友们分享。那么在这样的一段播客节目中呢，王向伟先生就把现在美国国内的情况和文化大革命时间呢做了一个很俏皮的类比。很重要的一点是什么呢？这个混乱这是一方面，另外还有一点，都强调敌人在内部我们看到川普这一边大棒没有对准中国也没有对准俄罗斯，不像拜登政府这一边似乎更强调的是以意识形态来进行敌友阵营的划分。首先呢，先是把大棒对准了自己内部敌人在内部，要让外必先安内，似乎是这样的一个策略同时现在美国国内和文革时期还有一个共同点，我觉得王向伟先生关注到的也是非常犀利的一点，就是什么呢？虽然很混乱，虽然大家谁也不知道明天到底会发生什么，但是领导人川普也好，毛泽东也好，非常的受欢迎，这又是为什么？还有一点，王向伟先生也在提问，就是美国国内现在出现的这样的一个情况，让很多美国的时政评论家和观察者都觉得十分的困惑，也十分的不安。那这是不是会给中国带来某一种策略窗口期？在这样一段播客节目中王向伟先生可以说是分享了他的看法。那么在今天节目之后我们也把这一段播客节目完整为大家呈现。当然在思想先驱报中我们首先还是要问一问和平先生的看法，反向尼克松这样的一个策略到底是不是现在川普政府与俄罗斯似乎要达成某一种和谈协议，或者达成某一种关系缓和的背后原因。美国现在国内出现的这样一个情况特别是马斯克领导他的这个 Doge 团队，可以说呢是这个把一个又一个的部门拆散，甚至连美国的这个就业数字都受到了联邦政府大规模裁员的影响。这到底与当年文革时期这样的一个做法有没有相同点和类似之处？到底中美关系在接下来会出现哪种转变？有没有历史时期与现在的情况比较类似？
谢谢李琦博士现在全世界的政治领袖全世界的投资者或者观察者都抓狂，因为他们不知道下一分钟美国的政策又会出现什么样的新的这个招数，或者说又有改变了之前确定的一些政策。这个主要是要看的美国这一次的变革的大的背景是什么。虽然有特朗普总统个人的个性行为的方式很多人感觉到很难琢磨其实呢这是特朗普总统的一贯的作风他不是今天是这样，他以前就是这个样子。 那么它的这个不确定性实际上是可以确定的，所以你在讨论特朗普政策的时候，你要把不确定当成确定来这个看待，你就不会那么惊讶，也不会那么的好像很难以应对即使他的招数是基本上可以确定的所以如果你真正其实不需要去看他的交易的艺术，你就看他最近几十年来的行为，其实这一点是非常清楚的。另外一个更重要的是，怎么看待美国的这一次的今天政变的变化？这不是简单的个人的权威的回归威权政治的回归，而是第三次这个冷战前后或者说是冷战前后吧，可以这么说吧。这个人类社会全世界范畴的第三场大的变革。第一场是来自于中国，毛泽东去世之后中国的改革开放。第二场呢是苏联的这个崩溃，而现在呢，这是美国率先进行的西方体制的改革。你可以说呢，它是革命整个的幅度非常之大，也不像中国或者是苏联之前还有一个更明显的酝酿期。其实西方也是很长时间的酝酿期了，对民主体制的讨论，对很多问题的产生的分歧，其实就是为今天的变革铺垫了一个基础。那你在这个这样一个角度看问题就不会很幼稚的、天真的、简单的提出一个在对华政策方面的一个单一政策的出现也就不会出现呢所谓的反向尼克森这种说法。因为今天的世界格局不是冷战时期的那种格局，是比较清晰的这个阵营，而现在是全世界都在随着美国的变革而起舞，所以它的秩序是世界性的，是全球性的。一个清晰的阵营根本就不可能在短期之内出现，反而是原来的阵营已经被摧毁，已经需要调整和改变在这种情况之下，任何聪明的国家，尤其是中小国家，都要扮演一个脚踏几十船的这么一个角色这样的话给自己一个安全的缓冲空间，而不是简单的选边站。而在于这个俄罗斯来讲，其实它也是这个样子，它已经跟中国的关系建立这个样子没有必要这个时候跟中国关系破坏，然后跟这个美国关系友好，回过头他跟美国联合一起打这个中国这种非常荒唐的这个这种举动出来。相反，中国也好，俄罗斯也好这个都是扮演一种这个几头押宝，或者是几头我都同时按照我自己的原则、我自己的利益来建立关系，而不是选边。俄罗斯现在也跟中国的关系在短期之内基本上看不出来有什么逆转的可能性。虽然中国人可能心里面有一点打鼓，或者说呢有一点担忧，实际上是只会是俄罗斯昏了头。否则的话，对于俄罗斯最佳的选择是跟中国搞好关系同时有利于跟美国搞好关系，同时因为跟美国搞好关系，跟中国的关系呢也就有了这个分量。所以这样一种互相牵制、互相利用、互相合作的关系，将会成为未来的世界局势的相当重要的一个现象简单的政治分出阵营的时代应该过去了，以意识形态、以宗教这种划分的方式都过去了不要说历史的症结已经证明是历史性的错误评价的错误，就是文明的冲突在未来都很难清晰的出现，因为全世界的阵营会更加的交错这种交错就是每一个人都要学会这个多头打交道，而不是简单的选边。所以这种情况之下，出现这个反向尼克森是几乎是没有可能性的没有可能性 所以中国在考虑外交局势的时候考虑世界秩序的时候应该不是那么的恐慌反而呢会增加它的这个稳定性，因为它需要的是跟全世界几乎所有的国家都希望打交道，这是中国的外交的原则，大小国家都想打交道意识形态不同也想打交道，宗教不同也想打交道。中国所奉行的其实是务实外交，美国奉行的是不是成人外交呢？也未必，我觉得大家也未必的太悲观了一点，我们还需要观察，还需要看。好了，我们再看看这个我们今天介绍的这个播客节目他们又是怎么说的。好，谢谢大家。
Welcome to Asian Insider Xiangwei.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you for having me.
Xiangwei, what do you make of the early weeks of the Trump administration? And perhaps we could start with the attacks on big government and then move on to talking about the shifts in foreign policy and so forth.
Okay, thank you. As a keen student of Chinese history, I cannot help but see parallels with China's Cultural Revolution regarding what US President Donald Trump and his billionaire ally Elon Musk did as they waging a war against the US federal bureaucracy. You know, why I'm saying this is because nearly 60 years ago, Mao Zedong, China's first generation leader, launched the Cultural Revolution in 1966. He launched the Cultural Revolution for many reasons. I think one of the reasons is that he's worried that China was becoming an elite country with bureaucrats only thinking of their own interests, and they had little regard for the interests and well-being of the ordinary people. So as a result, he mobilized the so-called Red Guards, mostly the high school students and university graduates, to attack government bureaucracies around the country, with the slogan, "Revolution is no crime, to rebel is justified." And also that as Mao exhorted the Red Guards to attack government bureaucracies around the country, he also started to promote outsiders to lead the government, just like what Donald Trump sort of did with his cabinets in his second term. In his second term, he packed his administration with all these very conservative and sort of part of his MAGA movement, aimed at so-called battling the Washington establishment and in the so-called, under the slogan, draining the swamp. The kind of cabinet picks that he has chosen is all very controversial, including his Secretary of Defense and Robert Kennedy Jr., for Health Secretary, and also the big tech critic, Brandon Carr, for heading the Federal Communications Commission. This kind of approach is sort of exactly what Mao Zedong did after launching the Cultural Revolution in 1966. Mm-hmm. He not only encouraged the Red Guards and the grassroots loyalists to take over the power at the central and local government levels across the country, and he started to promote the workers and the farmers who had little government experiences to run the government. For instance, Mao Zedong once trained Wang Hongwen, previously a security guard, and at a textile factory in Shanghai as his successor, making him a deputy chairman of the Communist Party's Central Military Commission. and the party's Central Military Commission is the highest governing council of the military. A third resemblance, a third parallel is that after Mao launched the Cultural Revolution, he said it repeatedly, the enemies were not outsiders like the US or the Soviet Union. The enemies came from within. I think that's exactly what US Vice President J.D. Vance said
Yes, indeed.
at the Munich Security Conference not long ago, where he warned the EU about the enemies. And he said to the effect that the enemies were not China or Russia, but from within. So all this sort of give me and others of students of Chinese history a sort of very interesting, fruitful thought on to look at what is going on in the United States.
Yes, fantastic, Xiangwei, that you should draw this most interesting parallel with the Cultural Revolution. But of course, the Cultural Revolution lasted more than a decade. And hopefully, perhaps it's not for us to hope, but at least we're not quite sure how long this could last in the United States, perhaps 4 years. And if J.D. Vance were to succeed Trump, it could stay on for another 4 years, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
But it does seem like a kind of purge, would you not say? And that too at the highest levels. It's something that you in China must have seen quite often, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think, again, we have to go back and talk about the Cultural Revolution. There was another reason Mao Zedong launched the Cultural Revolution was because he thought he was sort of lost control after another disastrous policy Mao introduced, the Great Leap Forward. The Chinese economy was in serious trouble. And then he will have to correct his policy. And then he thought he was losing power. That's why he launched the Cultural Revolution to get rid of the bureaucrats and senior officials who he believed were blocking his policies. And that's also the thing that we see happening in the United States, where I think Donald Trump is purging officials from all the major departments, including the military. And recently, he purged several generals in the military. He will probably have to leave the administration in less than 3 years, in 3 years' time. But I guess he wanted to complete transformation of the U.S. federal bureaucracy. He wanted to impose a permanent mark on how the U.S. government would be run. And then this kind of purge, as we can see from the China's Cultural Revolution, all those kind of purge and the attacks of the bureaucracy in the country had really plunged China into chaos for 10 years. And it took Deng Xiaoping several years to get things into order by launching the reform and opening up.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the same could happen with the United States, Yang Wei?
I hope. I don't know. It seems that, we are all outsiders, watching with intense interest of what is happening in the United States. And it seemed to me every day there is a new development. And it seems that according to what I read, despite the kind of chaos that Trump has instigated, it seemed to me he still enjoys very strong support among his power base. It is also because this is kind of a very strong reaction to what the sort of Democrats did over the past decade. And so, whether this will, how long this will continue, whether the Democrats will get the Congress back in the midterm elections next year, I think we still have to wait and see.
Yes, of course. Yes.
How things will go.
That is true. Xiang Wei, you must have been a very young man during the Cultural Revolution. Do you have any memories, direct memories of what it was like?
Actually, I was born in 1965, 1 year before the Cultural Revolution started. So from 1966 to 1976, I was barely 10 years old, but I still could feel the kind of craziness, the euphoria going on in China. I was born and grew up in a very industrial city in the northeastern part of China, but you could still feel it with the Red Guards chanting revolutionary slogans. I could also see the officials sort of being paraded on the streets. Even though I didn't know very much, but I could feel the euphoria. And it's also, maybe that's not something I should say it's in your podcast, is that everyone was sort of deeply affected. My name, Wang Xiangwei, in Chinese means Wang is my surname, Xiangwei means towards greatness. Mm-hmm. In fact, that was not my original name. My original name it's a different name. And then my father, swept in this euphoria, changed my original name to the current one, mm-hmm. to show the loyalty towards greatness, which means we address Mao as a great leader. So this is also his way of showing loyalty to the party. A lot of weird things happened during the Cultural Revolution.
Yes, indeed. And given the fact that you've done so well in the profession, Xiang Wei, I think I must say he got your name quite right, Xiang Wei.
Thank you. Yes. But I'm just using this as a kind of example to show
yes,
that lots of crazy things happened during the Cultural Revolution. Yes, later on, I quite like my name my father gave me.
It is a good one. But sitting here in Singapore and looking out towards your own country, Xiang Wei, it looks like President Xi Jinping has been doing a bit of shuffling of the ranks himself. If you look at shuffles in the military, and most recently we heard about the technology minister who seems to have been switched out. Are there some sort of parallels that you see between these two countries and these two men who seem to have a certain fondness for each other, if I may say so?
Yeah, Ravi, that's a very good question. I think what is happening in China right now is what Xi Jinping is doing. Yeah, as you said earlier, that Trump has frequently openly admired Xi Jinping for being a very forceful and strong leader. But I think what Xi Jinping is doing in China right now is different from what Donald Trump is. In some way, there is some similarities, but then mostly what Xi Jinping is doing is different, because right now, ever since Xi Jinping came to power late 2012, over the past 10 years, Xi has tried to consolidate his power through tight controls and mostly through the anti-corruption campaign. I think what that is happening in China is this anti-corruption campaign is still in full swing, mm-hmm. is still going on. And I think however, as I said earlier, there is something that China can learn from what sort of Donald Trump is doing in the United States. Right now, the Chinese officials and the state media are very happy to watch what is happening in the United States as Donald Trump must wage the war against the U.S. federal bureaucracy. But I recently wrote something on this subject. I believe that the Chinese officials should be inspired to take a deeper look at China's own bloated and inefficient bureaucracies.
Oh, that was indeed a first-class column, Xiang Wei. I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah.
But just to return to Donald Trump, the other big disruption seems to be foreign policy, and we just saw that big dust-up in the Oval Office just a few days ago between President Zelensky and President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance on the other side. From where you sit, what do you think have been the most remarkable foreign policy moves by Trump since coming to power?
Yeah, we are, I guess, like lots of people around the world, I'm deeply shocked at what transpires in that meeting. The fact that the whole drama was played live in front of the TV cameras. So my guess is that Trump and J.D. Vance deliberately allowed this to happen. It was truly shocking. But then, as I've been saying to many friends when we talk about this, is that I think right now, when we look at Donald Trump, we judge him by the values, by the common sense that we have. And then we see him doing things very unusual, shall I say. But then again, if you put yourself in his shoes, and then the picture will get clearer, is that the US, and then you can have a better understanding of his policy of America first, that the US does not want to be the superpower as the World Cup to rule the world. Trump wants to do everything with this mantra, America first. So, which means from a China's point of view, that's why I have been arguing this in my articles, in my talks, that Trump's 2.0 may not be all the gloom and doom for China, because I think that's the sort of consensus among most of the China watchers. My view is a little bit contrary. So let me explain. First of all, geopolitically, I think what Donald Trump is doing is going to create greater chaos on the international stage. Like 10 years ago, the Chinese President Xi Jinping sort of first started to say that the whole world would face unprecedented challenges not seen in a century. At that time, I think some people will interpret his remark as a bit of a overly dramatic. But now it has turned out, he's right. Now we are entering into where now the whole world is facing unprecedented changes and seen in a century, as Xi Jinping said himself. And within that context, what I'm trying to say is this, that what Donald Trump is doing to China, Canada, EU, and others just showed that China could definitely benefit from what Donald Trump is doing. Basically, Joe Biden, in his 4 years, from China's point of view, he sort of succeeded in building up a united front in pushing back against China's influence. And he somehow made some progress in that. But now with the things that Donald Trump is doing, I think Trump has undone that united front, which is against China. So it will give, as I have argued repeatedly, that it will give China a good opportunity to mend ties with its major trading partners like EU, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and maybe even Canada.
Right.
I mean, because as you see, over the past 4 years, particularly during the COVID years, those 3 COVID years, I think China's ties with these major trading partners, the ones I mentioned earlier, were very strained for various reasons. China's ties with EU was strained because China's support for Russia after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And China's ties with Japan, South Korea, and Australia, UK were also strained. And now with this chaos Trump has introduced, I think it definitely gives China this good opportunity to amend ties.
Yes, there's a lot for us here in Singapore and in Southeast Asia to be worried about because of our close ties to the mainland economy. But Xiangwei, personality quirks aside, where do you see the US-China relationship heading ultimately? And some people believe that what Trump is doing in Europe is essentially to split the close coordination and the close relationship that has developed between China and Russia. Are you of that view? Do you agree with that?
There were some concerns among China watchers that as Donald Trump is going to end the war in Ukraine, and then as Washington is trying to improve ties with Moscow, and that will come as Beijing's expense. I think the concerns are valid, but I'm not unduly worried. I don't believe that Putin will burn the bridges with China because Washington is talking to Moscow. But the concern is definitely valid. I think what China needs to do on the international front, as I have said earlier, is to take advantage of U.S. withdrawal to improve its ties with these major trading partners. Mm-hmm. But I still believe that Beijing does not want to antagonize Washington too much, and neither Washington wants to antagonize Beijing too much. Mm-hmm. I think officially, if you read media reports, this morning, Beijing reacted very strongly to the Trump's announcement of that the 20% tariff on China's exports to the United States will take into effect today. However, I do believe that Beijing and Washington, the officials from two countries, are meeting behind the scenes and trying to work out a deal.
I see.
On tariffs that both sides will find comfortable to bear with.
Right.
I think that is what is happening. And I hope, for the sake of mankind, I have been always the view that Beijing and Washington should work together. I think that right now they are talking. So my view here is also a bit of a contrarian, is that I believe in the next few months, or at least this year, the bilateral ties between Washington and Beijing will head for a period of relatively calmness. The reason being, as I have said earlier, they are trying to work out a deal. But then, having said that, the overall confrontation we are seeing right now between Beijing and Washington will continue until, I don't know when, until the day where there is a clear winner in this confrontation, which is that either China has overtaken the United States as the world's largest economy, or that the Washington wins and remains the lone superpower. Until we reach that equilibrium, I think the overall confrontation will continue. But then again, I think if you want to look at the China-US ties, I want to go back to a phrase I used in 2018 when Donald Trump launched the trade war against China. At that time, I said, and I still stick by that view, is that the bilateral ties between Beijing and Washington will be characterized by this 8-word phrase. In Chinese, it means 打打谈谈谈谈打打, which means the bilateral ties will be characterized by a period of fighting and followed by talks, and to be followed by fighting and to be followed by talks. So all in all,
I see.
Yeah.
So after the rain comes the dry period, you mean?
Yeah. It's, in Chinese, it's called 打打谈谈谈谈打打. Literal translation is fight, fight, talk, talk, fight, fight, talk, talk.
Xiangwei, that's been a most interesting conversation with you this morning, and there's so much to unpack from what you told us. Thank you so much for coming on Asian Insider.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'll see you soon.